to call this meeting of the Lakota Board of Education to order. Jenny, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Casper?
Here.
Mrs. O'Connor?
Here.
Mr. Parnell?
Here.
Mrs. Schaefer?
Here. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So
I'll
moved.
move. I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Such
Jenny?
as it is.
Jenny, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Parnell?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Schaefer?
Yes. All right, we're going to go into our board work session, and we are going to discuss the portrait of a graduate, and I believe Keith is our guest speaker on that.
Perfect. Thank you. So as you know, over the course of the past probably 12 months, we have been working on what we've called the Portrait of a Lakota Graduate. The purpose behind that is to, as we've gone through this process of trying to sort of reimagine what the high school experience can be for our students. And we wanted to make sure that we started with the end in mind. And so we spent a lot of time to figure out what those skills, characteristics, and attributes that we were all looking for, not only as educators, but as community members, as business partners, as parents. What are those skills, attributes, and characteristics we're looking for all of our graduates? And so we engaged our entire community in that process. We had focus groups with students and with teachers and administrators and college admissions officers. We had community conversations. We've had, good evening. We've had focus groups with specific elected officials to test out different ideas and different theories. We've put different designs. We brought those to you along the way to make sure that they kind of met your expectations. And we are here with our final product of that we are looking to roll live in the next 2 or 3 weeks so that we can push that out towards our whole community. I'd like to be able to share that with you now. You've seen versions of this. At one point, I did present a version that was based on a hand-drawn sketch by a very talented local artist.
Is that the one we're getting? Because that's the one we want.
I know, it's
I have it
not.
in my office.
The original is still there. It's gone through many iterations, and I relied on the community relations and PR department to put some finishing touches on it. And so the design of this really, what we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to tie together a number of different pieces of communication that we've got. And the pieces that we have are the strategic plan, which is core to the daily work that we do in our district and how we map our success. And we've talked about our 4 E's, and so we have wanted to map that daily experience to the 4 E's, the enrollment, enlistment, employment, and entrepreneurship for our students. And so we find that the Portrait of a Graduate is the way that we connect those things. And so what the front of this page does is it says that by focusing on our students who are in the middle, that by providing experiences that are tied to those 6 attributes along the bottom, that we will have successful graduates who find a pathway forward in one of those 4 E's. What we've done on the back side of this is that we've spelled out the specific descriptions of those. So each of those are kind of pairing together a adjective and noun pairing that we believe encompasses most, not all, but most of the ideas that we've put together from our community. And we've wordsmithed those enough. I'm sure that we could go in and parse those to a much finer degree, but I think at some point you just have to finalize that and move forward. We've tested this out with a number of different groups in the last probably 2 months, 3 months, and gotten a lot of good feedback, incorporated those ideas into this. We feel that it's at a good point. And so this is the design of what we would have. Where this lives or will live is we'll have a web page that will be attached to the district and co-attached or whatever to the curriculum page, so it connects with both of those ideas. The web page copy, the language that will go on there, is on the second page that I've passed out there. Just a description of it, and we didn't want to formalize that until we had this brought to you first. But it explains the purpose behind it, the process we went to get there, what the design of it means, and how it's used. And so this document will then be sort of live after that. Our hope is that we've got a Lakota Learning Day or Professional Development Day next Tuesday. We'd like to get this information out in front of teachers at that time so they can become more and more familiar with that. And honestly, this year is going to be a lot of doing that. It's getting people familiar with the language of that. What does that mean? How do I incorporate those things in? It's a heavy focus 7-12 this year, and then we'll broaden it out to K-12 after that. We want them to be very comfortable with that, and there's a lot of connections right away to the 7-12 environment. The next piece of that we do is that we figure out ways of measuring this and assessing these skills. And so a lot of this is important as we look at things like internships and job shadowing experiences and real-world learning opportunities we've got where we bring partners into the building to talk about those things. We talk about what kinds of assessments can we have in classrooms that are more connected to these skills. So there can be a paper pencil test, but there can also be a more project-based or real-world assessment of that learning that's more tied to these skills. This is also being tied into sort of a visual graphic for our strategic plan that we're providing for our teachers that says, our first tenet is we are personalized. So we talk to our teachers about what does that really mean and what does that look like day by day in my classroom? What are you really expecting me to do? So we kind of step those things out, and how do we measure those things? And part of that measurement of these skills is developing some student portfolio exhibitions of that work that we'll start piloting this year and say, what does it look like for kids to be able to talk this language in a project? And so we'll work with our innovation specialists and our administrators at the high school especially to start to develop some pilots of exhibitions of what this might look like in class. And the last piece of this that I think is really important is it starts to give some real life to the work that Katie Bauer does through our strategic partnerships, and how do we start to tie these skills directly into the internships and the job shadows, the guest speakers, the 4E days, all those things. How do these start to become those tags that we use all the time throughout all of our professional development, our course development, as we develop things like the Cyber Academy and the Lakota Business Solutions and the programs after that? How do we sort of use this language to start to know that we're hitting all those markers as we go through that? So in that sense, there was a lot of work to get to this point to coalesce around this language, and now it's getting people comfortable with it and then finding the ways to always keep making that connection back to this as we go forward. The last piece of that would be the goal is for me and a team to return in November, kind of lay out more of a long-term 3 to 5 year plan of what those high school specific programs that are tied to this, that are also tied to the new graduation requirements. So we'll put all of that together in a package for you so you understand that, our counselors understand that, administrators, and that starts to inform our master's facilities plan eventually. So what does high school physically look like in the future that ties in these kind of programs that are tied to this? So trying to get as much of that alignment as possible and using this language along the way. So it's been a lot of work getting to this point, a lot of fantastic conversations with people engaging in this, and excited to kind of get this rolling forward and start to, there are a lot of ahas that happen for teachers as we start to have those conversations. Oh, that makes sense connected to this. Oh, that makes sense why this is happening between the strategic plan and this, and then building leadership plans that our principals are building out and our professional development. So happy to answer any questions you might have or thoughts and ideas. But
You sure?
Yep.
I just want to highlight one thing that you said. You talked about how you guys are working towards a document for the teachers to highlight kind of what does this mean and what is this going to look like in your day-to-day, which that's phenomenal, right? Because most plans fail because of buy-in, or they don't actually understand what the outcome's supposed to be. Thinking through the community and the parent perspective, as a parent, what might I expect to look different in that classroom? Has that been a thought through your mind and how you might communicate with parents or the community? Because I think our community, or at least our parents in our community, have a good feel that we went through the strategic planning process. We've done a great job of branding and creating this feel around what we want to move forward with. But I don't know if there's a feeling of, okay, so what might look different in my child's class with teaching and learning?
Sure. And we have had that conversation. I think that eventually there has to be some sort of companion guide to this that's for parents, a handbook sort of. So I hear these things in the strategic plan. What does that look different? the feedback we've gotten also is, let's make sure that we have our teachers comfortable with that language first, so that they're not getting hit at an open house or parent-teacher conferences like, so I heard about this thing that's gonna be very different in my kid's classroom. I wanna make sure they're there, and then we do have to make sure that we have a translation for parents. And it can't be something, there's nothing in here that is earth-shattering, or, the nice part is that this is all language that when we roll this out in front of parents, there are ahas there, like, oh, that makes sense, I understand that. It's not too over the top with educational jargon or things like that. So I think when we make that translation, that'll happen. I would look for that to be somewhere later in this fall, that we get that information out to parents
Sure.
in a meaningful sort of way.
Great,
Yep.
thank you.
So you do expect something to go out to parents in the community like this year, so we're still.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
I would think it'll take us probably 4 to 6 weeks to put together, make
Sure.
sure it's right, we'll probably test it with a
Right.
few parents.
And like you said, make sure the staff understands and
Right.
gets on board.
Yep.
The other thing that I like, sorry, the other thing too that I like is that it ties in with strategic plan, it ties in with several other initiatives, so it's not one-offs here and one-offs there, which
Right.
we are so guilty of in education. So I appreciate the threading
Mhm.
between the different initiatives.
I agree.
The timing's good, timing's right. And
And
then
the-
you and your team did a great job with the Cyber Academy kickoff too, which you mentioned, so I just wanted to mention it here too.
Right.
I'm
Yep.
pontificating. Anybody else?
No, you go ahead.
Keith, I really appreciated the opportunity to be part of this work, and it looks very different from where we started.
It does.
I actually liked your original hand drawing. It was great. What I expressed in our meetings with our team, and what I continue to be concerned about, is that the metrics of how do we know that we're successful are not here.
Mhm.
And I'm curious about why we would roll it out to our staff without the metrics attached to it. So will they be incorporated before we roll it out?
So the metrics are not real metrics to the portrait of a graduate as much as they are to the strategic plan, is the way I've looked at it, is that the portrait of a graduate is the picture of what you're looking for, but the way that we're going to deliver on that is in that second tenet of the strategic plan, that we are, future ready. And so how are we measuring the number of internships that are done, the real world learning that we've got going on, graduate surveys that are tied to this. So that's the way that we've looked at it, is that typically the portrait of a graduate does not include the measurements in there, but those are tied into a different document. I think it'll be our job to tie those together, though, so that these are not seen as something separate. And I think that's the way we've gone about it, but I understand that concern, and I think we'll want to make sure that that's not a confusing point as we go forward. Does that make sense? Or am I making sense, I guess?
It makes sense. I'm not necessarily in agreement with you.
Okay.
What I'm concerned about is, and we received really positive feedback on this when we did the community meetings and community leader meetings, and had no idea you all were doing this, so that was very positive. But I don't want it to be just a feel-good document.
Absolutely.
And I think unless there is some firm, here's how I'm measuring what a responsible collaborator is able to do, even if it's just a few points across each one, I'm not sure that it will not be just a feel-good document.
Sure.
So
Good feedback.
I'm continuing to express that concern.
Thank you. Yep.
Do you have anything you want to share? Anyone else have any other thoughts?
We just appreciate all the work your team has done. We know it's been a long process, and it was done thoughtfully, and a lot of voices were heard in this, so we appreciate that, or I do.
Thank you.
So kind of give us, I know you said it's going to be the next piece is going to be taking this down to the classroom level, but can you give us a snapshot of some of the changes you do foresee from this document?
Sure. And so the partner document that we are proposing, I guess, to explain it through with teachers, focuses 7-12 a lot right now. And so the work that we see is specifically around looking at like 6th, 8th, and 12th grades in terms of what does capstone experience that are tied to these. So we're piloting some of that between student-led conferencing and then an end-of-the-year capstone in 6th and 8th grade, which start to really pull out these skills and how do kids talk about those things. 12th grade is also tied in with graduation requirements, so we haven't been able to do that work yet because those just came out.
Sure.
But that's sort of where the state is headed, so that's part of what that looks like. Finding at critical points in our school district, how do we give opportunities for students to demonstrate these based on the coursework they're doing academically in school, their knowledge of themselves as a learner. When you talk about persistent problem solvers and critical thinkers, having them understand the work that they've done that ties to those so they can talk that language, that's really important. The other piece of this is tying in the real-world learning focus through Katie Bauer and tying these to then student work that's happening there. The other piece that has been interesting is that when we talk about professional development with our staff and looking at day by day what happens in there, because we can come up with a plan at central office, but if the teachers aren't seeing that value, so we've spent time with our innovation specialists who are in each of our buildings and with this document, and how do we sit side by side with teachers, and when they're looking at their work in terms of assessing student knowledge, because all this is tied to content standards too. It's not totally separate from that. So when they're doing a project in class, we have PBL teams at 4 of our schools this year, how are these skills embedded within those? So I think when we talk about project-based learning, when we talk about real-world learning, when we talk about student ownership of learning, when they're, the 2 schools that we've got this year who are practicing this or piloting this are going to have their students talking to their teachers and their parents about these skills and about their academic progress. I think that's a model that we can use to move forward. In honesty, I think it would probably take, you're talking about year 2 or 3 to where this is seen every day at the classroom level, because I think there's a part of just teachers getting comfortable with talking this language and speaking that and embedding that, because I don't want to see it as a compliance document. Well, here's your checklist of how this lesson or this unit did these 6 items, and it kind of goes into a binder. We haven't had success with that, so I think that having it more embedded in the daily practices will take a little bit of time, which is why I'm hesitant sometimes to say, here's what your child's experience is going to look like.
Sure.
It's the right balance of throwing the seed out there and then following up with the appropriate work down
Sure.
below that. And to be honest, there is not a document that is here that says, here's quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3 of how this will look differently or how we're rolling that out. And I think that what I'd hope to be able to come back with in November is more of a fleshed out plan of what they're telling us how that's going to look in their schools. It's a success we've had with that kind of model in the past, is not having it from central office, but having it really embedded in the buildings.
So you're expecting the staff to actually help build the measurement system?
Yes. Well, the school administrators, innovation specialists, our assistant directors of instruction, especially at that building level. They're going to build what the experiences look like. They're going to build the measures of success of this and
And it'll
other
be
plans.
consistent across the district?
That's the goal, right?
Well,
Go ahead.
we just keep interrupting
I
each
know.
other. I mean, I think that from my perspective, when I look at the portrait of a graduate, it's just that it's a portrait, it's a snapshot, right? It's this picture that we're given of what we believe a district student should have when leaving. I am very concerned that we would add metrics to that specifically, because I think that the metrics are backed up by the strategic plan. That's why we went through that effort, and that's where we want all of our data collection to be. These are just what we're putting out, and we're saying, this is it, right? This is that well-rounded child, and I believe we can get to that point. To the point that I made earlier about, just the parents and what are their expectations, I often have found, and I think we all have, that change comes when there's some expectation from the other side of the table. And I totally respect what you're saying in regards to the teachers have to be on board. They have to understand, they have to be trained, they have to get there. At some point, though, I think that on the other side of the table, there should be an expectation of shifts that are happening in each of those classroom environments across the district. So there's definitely a balance, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I think you answered my question,
Yeah.
so good.
And I understand that. I understand that throughout this process, there have been pulls and tugs both ways to say, and a lot of those coming from me saying, how do we know this is happening? How do we know that
Yeah.
how do we deliver on this? And I pull back or talk myself through that and say the same thing, like, it can't be, there's expectations that I've got to have, but there are also deliverables that they've got to be able to make sense for and lead at the building level. We've done a lot of work empowering our principals, assistant principals to be instructional leaders over the past year or so.
Yeah.
And I think this is exactly one of those things. I really want them to feel empowered by this and confident going into classrooms, looking for these. That's what those pieces below each of those descriptors are, real look-fors in a classroom.
Yeah.
So when we get to that point where we're holding people accountable to something and making sure that we can deliver on things, that's how we build out those look-fors in a classroom.
Yeah, and it's challenging, right? These things that we're talking about down here on the portrait are very different than did I master a math skill or get a reading score, right? When you're talking about adaptive learner, my daughter might be a different type of learner than Todd's child. And so when we look at that, what it means to be adaptable is going to be across this continuum and spectrum. So we've got to caution ourselves from really laying down what we believe it should be and having metrics around that.
One of the best conversations I had around this was with one of our junior school principals who is interested in this idea of student-led conferencing, so empowering kids to be able to talk this. And he said, I finally have a document here that I can walk my teachers and my students through and have them tell us about themselves as kids related to this and give them feedback. And I thought that was a great way to think about it. And have the students at the center, as they should be, students at the center of that learning. And make this language that kids can speak on their own. I would love to be able to have a son or daughter, if I had any of those, that said, here is how I am a persistent problem solver, here's how I'm an adaptable learner, and here's what I can do with that in the future.
That's awesome.
One of the things I saw today, and it was not a scheduled visit, but I popped into Liberty Junior today. I didn't tell you this. So this type of learning, teaching and learning is already permeating out there, and I've seen it, and I see it every day. But when I was at Liberty Junior today, they had 100 kids together collaborating. They're building out TED Talks, and I think everybody knows what a TED Talk is, about something that they're passionate about. And so the kids are engaged, they're collaborating, and they wanted to show me, this is junior high kids, pulling me in, saying, I want you to see my TED Talk and give me feedback on it. So the kids were doing it for me, but they were also doing it for one another. The other thing that was different in my experience at that building today was the teachers kept pulling me aside saying, this is really good, this isn't what we've done before. So I don't know if it's the same building you were talking about or not, but
It's different, but it's
different building, but it was
Also
same. But a lot
a
of,
great team.
I mean, it's not gonna be when we're rolling this out to the teachers, we're not gonna be flipping a switch and say, here, do this now, because it's already out there.
It's already
And it's already
happening.
going on, and it's more organic, so. And Eric Bauman said, he goes, I've never seen, we can't get 100 kids together to be engaged in anything, but this is working.
The last
So-
two people I've heard who have gone through that building have said the exact same thing. Like,
Really?
almost 100% engagement from the students in what they were working on, which I,
We didn't rehearse this,
yeah.
so.
Well, I mean, I think we've heard this all along in our community conversations and elsewhere from our broader community, our staff, and our students. So I think there's been demand on all fronts, so I can't imagine that any of this is going to meet much resistance. It's always a function of time, but this seems like something that can be built in alongside what they're doing
Right.
without it taking additional time.
And that's always my fear with something that feels new, is like, and now what goes on the not doing list,
Right.
right? And I think over time, this will become just part of that, like, we can do this, or we can do this a little differently and hit a lot of these, and owning that, so, I'm excited.
Any other thoughts or?
Thank you, Keith.
And so the plan is that next Tuesday, when we have a teacher work day, is to get this in front of them. And we'll hopefully have the link to a website built out by then. And a little bit of just a one-pager. Teachers keep asking, like, just give me a one-pager on what this means, like what this looks like. And so we tried to do a little bit more of a roadmap for them that takes the strategic plan and really breaks it down to what do I do in my classroom that's any different, some of the points here. And we tried to do a year by year of, here are the expectations. Make this adjustment this year, this adjustment the next year, keep getting better at that. So we're excited to get that out in their hands and be working towards that. And then we start to collect all the measurables behind the scenes. So,
And I think they're going to be surprised too, because like you said, some of them are doing it without knowing they're doing it. You know, it's just something different,
totally, right?
you know, and like Julie said, the kids have been begging at the high school level for this for 2 years,
Mhm.
to be more involved in their education and how it's done and what they want, so.
Right. And along the way, if there's feedback or things that we're not seeing or want more of, and Linda, to your point, to make sure that this is, we know that we're getting the delivery that we're looking for, and we know what success looks like, we'll keep coming back with that. So if you don't see what you like, let me know, and we'll keep
I
delivering.
won't hesitate to do that, Keith.
Sure of it. I expect that.
Thank you for the good work.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll move to adopt the bond refunding resolution. Do I have a motion to approve the bond refunding resolution?
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Right, discussion?
So, I was presented with an opportunity last week, that we have a refunding that's in the money, meaning we can save, some money if we refund some debt. It's a 2012 debt issue. And the estimates that I have on the refunding is that our current interest rate, the average is 4.3% on that outstanding debt. If we refinance it, we could lower it to 2.37%. Again, these are estimates based on what's going on right now. So cash flow savings would be about $1.2 million, and present value savings would be about $1.1 million. So I believe it's worth our time, but time is of the essence. I don't know how long this will hold, so I'd like to get started on this as soon as possible.
So again, for anyone else, we typically don't do votes during a work session, but because this was time critical, that's why we're making the decision to do this, because we don't want to lose the opportunity
Right.
to save this money.
Yes.
Any other thoughts, discussion?
And the savings over a specific time period, Jenny?
There's 10 years left on this debt issue, so it would be over the 10-year period.
All right. Anything else?
No.
Jenny, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Lovell,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Parnell,
Yes.
Mrs. Schaefer.
Yes. Thank you. With that, it's time to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Jenny, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mrs. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Lovell,
Yes.
Mr. Parnell,
No, I want to keep going.
Mrs. Schaefer.
Yes.